Welcome, everybody. Good to see you again. Sorry about canceling last week. Sorry for anyone that missed online. So just to catch up where we are, we finished the opening sections of this section of the book on the short long path, and we understand now that we have this other kind of love, an ahava mesuteret, a hidden love that is actually within every single Jewish person and is hidden above our consciousness, above our rational personality, so to speak, and that it's so powerful that we've seen through history, if a person were threatened with death to perform an act of idol worship, that they would actually give up their lives without even knowing why. They just, I can't. That love kicks in, and it's there. There's a red line, and it allows us to overcome even the obstacle of sacrificing our life, God forbid. So how does that help us? Because here we are, thank God, free and happy at Temple Israel. We can do whatever we want. No one's threatening us. So it's just hiding there in our subconscious, perhaps. How can it help us? So now in this section, the Alter Rebbe is giving us the tools to take that red line and, let's say, transfer it to any situation we want. Right? Take that red line where I would even give up my life to not do something and say, let me take that drive, let me take that red line, let me model it, and now apply it to some other situation. Right? So no danger, no stress, just normal life, but now I can have the same resolve. I can have the same emotional commitment about whatever goal I may have in Judaism as a Jew. And so we learned at the beginning of this chapter, right, that we heard all the commandments in terms of the first two commandments. I'm your God, you have no other gods before me. And then he started this conversation where to understand how we can move that red line around, we need to reframe, first of all, how we view divine oneness. And because of that, how we view what idol worship is. So to give you a spoiler, that red line of idol worship that historically has ignited this hidden love within Jews in every generation, we're going to learn to take that and model it and transfer it to almost any situation. But to do that, we have to change how we process the world, how we look at divine oneness, and how we look at idol worship itself. And so I think we are at the 12th of Shvat on page 283, is that right, for the coming?
That's correct.
Andrew, when you talk about the Alter Rebbe, do you have somebody specifically in mind, or just...
Yeah, the Alter Rebbe is the author of this book, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi. The question is, who is the Alter Rebbe? That's each of the Rebbes has like their name, and then they also have their sort of, the so to speak, Rebbe nickname that they have, like the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe.
And he's the Alter Rebbe.
He's the Alter Rebbe. He's the first Rebbe of this tradition, and there's been 7 since him in this tradition of Chabad Hasidus. Ki hithavot kol halamot elyonim v'tachtonim me'ayin liyesh. 283 in the middle. V'chayutam v'kiyumam ha'mekaymam shelo yachzeru liot ayin v'efes k'shehaya. Sure.
For the coming into being of all the upper and lower worlds out of nothingness, and their life and their existence, that is, that force which sustains them, so that they do not revert to nothingness and naught, as they were before they were created.
Right, so we discussed this last time. When a human person makes something, I take wood, and I take metal, and I take graphite, and I reshape it into being a pencil, right? But I didn't make anything. I didn't create anything. I just changed it from one state to another. The wood was already wood. The graphite was already graphite. The eraser, I don't know what it was beforehand. The metal was metal, right? I took it and I changed it from one state to another state, and that's what we call making something. But what did I truly make? It was all there beforehand. When we talk about God making the world, creating the world, it's not changing something from one state to another and then it has its own existence again, right? It's actually creating it out of nothingness and all the time. If you remember the example we talked about, classically we say if a person throws a rock, I think I use my cell phone, if a person throws a rock, is it now a flying rock? Does that rock fly? No, it's just a rock that someone threw, and its whole quality of flying through the air belongs to the person that threw it. It's the thrower that owns the flying. Once the rock lands, it's just a rock again, right? It doesn't become a flying rock. try and project that onto this concept, this reality that the world is being created continuously, projected onto time, space, and consciousness for us by, and we'll see exactly how technically, but by God. So just like that rock doesn't own its flying nature, it's not a flying rock, the world doesn't own its existing, right? It's an existing world that's being existed by God, and so its only reality, its only sense of existence is that God is existing it, and it has no reality outside of that. Right? But we look at it and we think, well, I can make a pencil and then it exists, so when God makes the world, it must also exist. We assume that God's act of creation is anything like our act of creation. It's natural. So the Alter Rebbe, like many times in Hasidus, is trying to create a barrier between my human experience of something and now trying to understand how that works in terms of the divine. And we have to limit our own understanding of how I create something and now try and understand what it means for God to be creating the world out of nothing, which is like, at one point he says, if the entire world tried to work together to create one gnat and animate it, they couldn't do it. And that was in a time before there was modern science. Even now, every lab in the world worked together to try and create a gnat out of raw materials and animate it. We still couldn't do it, or rather out of nothing, right? So that's what's happening now, and that's what we want to impress in our minds, that we're dealing with a world that is actually being existed, being created out of nothing all the time.
Has your intense study of Kabbalah had a positive effect on your life?
My wife tells me yes.
Yes.
She's the expert on that, to some extent.
She says she sees now that you really are the nice guy you told her you were.
She says, there you go, exactly. The comment was, my wife now says I'm really the nice guy that I told her I was when we met. Good. Eino ela devar Hashem v'ruach pi v'yitbarech ha-melubash bahem.
Is nothing other than the word of God and the breath of his mouth that is clothed in these words.
Right, so now we get to this word of God, the breath of God's mouth that's clothed in these words. So what is this? Right? And I know whenever we use anything anthropomorphic, it's a danger, and we start to think it's so immature. Someone thinks that God has this big mouth and makes giant sounds out past the Milky Way, and they reach Earth and somehow form things, right? So no one believes God has a physical face. No one believes God has a mouth. No one believes that God's arm reaches down like a giant arm and grabbed the Israelites, took them to Israel. We're using this language to try and understand something about God through ourselves, right? And to chunk it up even more, it's not that we're saying, well, I have an arm, so God has an arm, right? And I'm trying to understand God and say, well, God is something like God has a giant arm because I have one, so that must be what God's like. It's just the opposite. The original, it is a metaphor, but even more than that, the original is God and the copy is me. It's not that I'm saying God has an arm because I have an arm, and what else can I say? It's that God created us in God's image, so whatever we have, the original is, so to speak, upstairs. The original is somewhere in the Ein Sof in some capacity, and I'm just a very, very poor physical representation of that quality, right? So the quality of chesed, of giving something, if I were to hand you this, I'd hand it to you with my right hand and say, here you go, right? The quality of contributing, that's an abstract quality that exists within God infinitely, and we can't understand that aspect of chesed. We can't. But we have a little very, very bad snapshot of it. They got copied and photocopied and then crumpled up and thrown out the window and then opened up and then photocopied again, and then somebody said, I think I saw something and drawn it, and that was photocopied, and then I'm looking at this picture, I'm like, what is that? We have a really bad facsimile of it right here in my right arm. So the way I use my right arm, that's explaining something to me about what chesed is in the supernal worlds, because I am a copy of that. And same thing with divine speech. We're not being immature and thinking there's this giant being that's speaking. Something about my speech is a copy of something that existed before there was time, space, or consciousness, and now I'm a bad representation of that. So when we say God speaks, I meant to look at my faculty of speech and say, okay, what could that mean possibly with the Ein Sof, that I can't even touch an understanding of that, but what can I get from my speech because it's a copy of something else? You see what I mean? So rather than being this sort of childish, immature image of God, it's actually a very sophisticated exercise in trying to strip away the physicality from our own consciousness and then try and reach across this infinite boundary to get something about the Ein Sof. So coming back to what is speech, and how is it that the world is created by speech? Right? What is speech? What kind of phenomenon is speech just for us? Like, it's a very strange thing. We sit around making these noises and looking at each other for a long time, and we're not creating food, we're not building shelter, we're not doing a million things. We spend all this time doing this exercise.
We're communicating with one another.
Okay, so communicating means what?
Means what?
Yeah, communicating is a good start.
It helps me orient myself in what is called the world.
Well, I can do that without speaking. I can look around and figure that out. Why am I speaking to somebody else to communicate? What does communication mean?
It's understanding, it's creating relationship.
Understanding what?
Understanding the other and creating relationship with the other.
So how does speech let me understand the other? Okay, so thought and speech has something to do with it. Somehow speech lets me understand other and thought in some way. Go on.
What other people are thinking.
What other people are thinking, right? Why can't I understand what other people are thinking without speech?
You can't read minds.
Okay, so it's hidden.
Yeah, it's like
We're
the
not
rest-
mind readers.
We're not mind readers, exactly.
Right.
So there's all
It's
this.
not written on your forehead.
Yeah, so all of us are sitting here, and if none of us spoke, all of us have some reality going on, Adam included, right? All of us have some reality going on inside of us, but it's hidden to everyone else. So how good a relationship is that?
We're all idiots.
Right, we're just, you're there, I'm here, there's some relationship, but it's not the relationship we want, because there's something hidden within every being.
So it's a pathway, like a pathway,
Okay, but a pathway for what? Yeah?
to get into somebody's mind,
Or-
what their thoughts are.
Or for them to reveal what's hidden within them.
Okay.
Right? And for them to establish a relationship with another. So that's the key of what we're trying to understand about God when we say that the world is created by divine speech. When there's just Ein Sof, right? Before the world was created, there was just God alone. Did God speak to anybody?
No.
Who's God going to speak to? And God didn't create speech yet. There's no such thing as speech, so there's just infinite. It's just pure infinite with no divisions. There's no phenomenon called speech. There's no phenomenon called a being because there's only God.
Speech was when Adam spoke to Eve and named her because there was somebody else there to talk to.
Okay, but that wasn't the first speech. That was the first human speech. You're
That's
saying.
first human.
Yeah, I'm talking about the first phenomenon of speech was God said.
Let there be light.
Right, that's speech. And every other speech is a model of
But
that.
we weren't there to hear it.
Well, that's what we're getting to, right?
Yeah.
So the one component of speech is we create relationship by revealing what's hidden within us. So when there's Ein Sof, it's just Ein Sof, there's nothing else. But hidden within that Ein Sof is any possible phenomenon of creation. God could create anything if God wanted to, including the phenomenon of creating, which hasn't been created yet, right? So it's all hidden within there. For God to take what's hidden within the Ein Sof and reveal it so that now it's manifest in some way, there's some phenomenon called speech, right? And if you learned the Kabbalah with us, if you remember from the earlier chapters, it's synonymous with Malchut of Atzilus, right? In the holy world of Atzilus, which is just one with divinity, the sphere of Malchut, which is expression, that's also divine speech. It's the same thing. There's a million names for it, right? I think Matronita and Knesset Yisrael, right? Every generation has had a way of trying to understand this phenomenon, and they have terms for it. They all mean the same thing. This is some phenomenon that's not a giant being opening its mouth and speaking. This is the phenomenon of something was hidden within the Ein Sof, and now there's a process by which it is now revealed, and that process implies now there's another being because it's communicating with something. And that act of communicating with another being is the creation of that other being. It's not separate. It's not that God had to say, oh, I want someone to talk to, so let me create a world and then talk to it. When God speaks, because that just implies God wants there another being, that is the process which creates that other being, the world. Right? Not humans yet, although, Adam Kadmon was contained in that, so the primordial, whatever we're going to use, of all of humanity was actually contained in it kabbalistically, but Adam hadn't been created physically. So that's what we mean when we say God spoke and said, let there be light, and let there be an ocean, let there be a separation, right? God's speech is actually the supernal process of revealing what's hidden in the Ein Sof, and then also creating a world that can be communicated with. So we get a little glimpse of that when we're speaking to each other and we're communicating something that's hidden. We're supposed to understand, that's what the Torah means when it says that God's speech creates the world. Now, how does this relate to our question of does the world exist? Right? Because our question is, can there be anything other than God? We said there has to be only God. And for a Kabbalist, that's a given, that's infinite, absolute, indivisible. So there can't be a world. So we know already the world doesn't exist. Whatever I'm seeing, for sure, it's not really there. It's really nothing compared to God. Follow? However, now we have this other element called divine speech. Now I've got a problem, right? Okay, clearly the world, whatever I'm experiencing, is just God and doesn't exist, right? Because that's just plain common sense. If there's an infinite God, absolutely infinite, the world is not there, whatever I'm experiencing. But this divine speech thing, now is that changing God? Right? See the problem? If God had not spoken before creation, and now to create creation God had spoken, well, isn't that a change in God? Isn't that something new? Isn't that something created? Doesn't that really somehow exist? I mean, God's infinite. Can't God speak and create words that exist? And when I say something, God knows things change, right? For the good or for the bad. So now we have this problem. The world doesn't exist, but this divine speech, which is creating the world, does that exist?
Does God want us to know about it?
Well, yeah. I mean, God came and told us all about it in the Torah, presumably, so God wants us to know about it, right? But the question here is, existentially, does this exist? Is there now another entity besides God, which we're going to call God's speech? So to get us through that, the Alter Rebbe is now going to spend the next 2 chapters, this chapter showing us the illustration, the next chapter kind of going into it, the illustration of does a word have any relevance compared to the whole faculties of a human being? So one word that I might say hello. Does that one word, does it really exist compared to my whole phenomenon of being a human being that created it? Or is it basically irrelevant and has no existence? And by looking at that, we're going to understand something about this question of does divine speech really exist, or is it also just basically...
So if it doesn't exist, why do we have to say it? Why do we use it?
That's another question, right? The question of what our perspective is and why we have to use words and why we seem to exist, that's a separate question. But first, let's look at the question of, from God's perspective, does the world exist? No. From God's perspective, does divine speech exist?
Yes.
And then we've got to look at it, okay? So here we go. I told you, these chapters are the trickiest ones. ולמשל, כמו בנפש האדם, כשמדבר דיבור אחד, שדיבור זה לבדו כלא ממש, אפילו לגבי כללות נפשו המדברת. Right, so when I say that one word, hello, how does that word, how much does that word matter compared to every word I could possibly say?
Well, it's discourteous to ignore somebody when you see them.
Okay, no, that's the situation. But relative to every word I could possibly say or think of at any time, at every moment of my life, I could say any word I want in any language. I can make up a word. So I have seemingly an infinite supply of words that I could possibly say at every moment of my life. And it just goes on and on, right? There's no end. You can imagine how many words you could possibly say. So that one word, compared to the infinite possible words I could say at every point in my life, has what relevance? Right. What's one compared to infinite? It's basically not there, right? One has no relevance compared to infinity. Now I live a certain lifespan. I can only physically say a certain number of words, but the fact is, each moment I could pick any word to say.
But it has a relevance based on the situation you're in. No?
Yes, so from the situation, no question, I'm saying hello,
Right.
or I'm saying tablecloth, I'm saying whatever,
Yeah.
and it has relevance, but I'm saying relative to the amount of words I could say, right?
Not to the situation.
Yeah, because here, remember, there's our perspective and there's God's perspective. So I know from our perspective I exist, and when someone pinches me I say ow, but from God's perspective the question is, does the world exist? We're looking at it from God's perspective. So to get at that, he's getting an example where one of my words compared to my faculty of speech is basically irrelevant, right? Just numerically.
If I pass you on the sidewalk
Yeah?
and I ignore you, and I don't want to use the one word,
Yeah.
is that what God wants me to do?
No, we're not talking about, the question is if I pass someone and don't speak to them and offend them, is that what God wants? This is not something we should act on. This is just an illustration to understand kind of how God is seeing the world, not my behavior. Yeah? Yeah, let's not go too far astray on that one. שהוא בחינת לבוש האמצעי שלה, שהוא כוח הדיבור שלה.
Which is the soul's middle garment, example, organ of expression, namely its faculty of speech.
The soul has?
The soul has three garments, thought, speech, and action, of which speech is the middle one, with action being lower than it, and thought higher. One word has no value, even in comparison with this faculty.
Right, so we know about thought, speech, and action, right? We've learned about this earlier in the Tanya. So this is the middle garment, and I could say any number of words at any point through my whole life, and one word is as if irrelevant and non-existent compared to that infinite amount of words I could say. That's the point. שיכול לדבר דיבורים לאין קץ ותכלית.
Since this faculty can produce an infinite number of words, and next to infinity, one word has no value whatsoever. In actual practice, there is a limit to the number of words one can speak. However, this is only because the physical organs involved in speech have a limited functional ability. The soul's capacity for speech is limitless.
Yeah, so our capacity is limitless. We happen to only pick certain words to say, and we have a certain duration of time to say them, so obviously there's a limited number I'll say in my life, but my capacity for speech, it's infinite. So one word, now we see, numerically, it's as if it's irrelevant or not there. But that's just one step up. That's compared to my soul's capacity for speech.
It says your soul's capacity for speech is limitless.
The soul's garment of speech.
Right, but the physical is limited.
Yes,
Because we
there's,
have a limited amount of time in this body on Earth.
yes, but in that time, there is an unlimited number of words that I could try and say in unlimited combinations, right? So it's like a chess game. So that's the point he's making. But we go beyond that. וכל שכן לגבי בחינת לבוש הפנימי שלו שלה, שהוא המחשבה שממנה נמשכו הדיבורים והיא חיותם.
Surely then, this word has no value when compared to the soul's innermost garment, i.e. the garment which is closest to the soul itself, namely its faculty of thought, which is the source of speech and its life force.
Right, so now we're going to thought. Right, so where does speech come from? Hopefully I'll think of something before I speak, and even if I'm speaking just off the cuff, it's something I've thought about. So speech flows out of thought, we understand that. Thought is much more refined, and thought truly is much more infinite compared to speech in terms of I can have concepts that aren't even in words, obviously, right? In Hasidus we understand there's something called action of thought, letters of thought, and thought of thought. So often we think in terms of there's like a person speaking inside my mind, and that's letters of thought, but I can also have just pure intellectual concepts in my mind without articulating them with language. And that speech of thought, that thought of thought is infinite compared to even speech of thought. And both are infinite compared to the actual physical process of speech, which is a lower phenomenon, right? So that one word now, compared to any word I could say, is irrelevant. But now compared to any thought I could think physically in my brain, is now doubly irrelevant, right? Because there's so much more of a set in there of what I could think. And then we go on. ואין צריך לומר לגבי מהות ועצמות הנפש, שהן 10 בחינותיה הנזכרות לעיל, חוכמה, בינה, דת וכו'.
It goes without saying that this word is as naught when compared with the essence and entity as opposed to the garments of the soul, these being its 10 attributes mentioned above, Chokhmah, Bina, Dat, and so on, the 7 emotional attributes.
Right, so now we've moved from the garments of the soul to the actual essence of the soul. right? So compared to one word compared to any word I could say is as if it's not there. That one word compared to any thought I could think is now even, again, at another level of infinity not there. But now compared to the aspects of my soul, Chokhmah, Bin, and Dat, and the Midot, the actual sefirot within my soul, which are just pure spiritual flows, now it's not just not there. Now we're going from, call it quantitative non-existence to qualitative non-existence. Right? Like I can have quantitative infinity, right? Say someone has an infinite amount of money. You can't imagine it because it's impossible, but a person has an actual infinite amount of money, unlimited money, absolutely. To them, no amount of money has any meaning, right? If I drop a penny on the ground or drop $1 million on the ground, they're equally irrelevant. They have infinite money, and both numbers are just basically irrelevant. They don't care because they have infinite money. So $1, $1 million, $1 billion are all irrelevant. However, in some sense, a dollar is still relevant because what is it that they have an infinite amount of? It's money. So each element of that infinity is a dollar, and it's those dollars that give them the quality of having an infinite amount of money. So although quantitatively, in terms of numbers, any amount of money is now irrelevant and non-existent to them, qualitatively, it still is relevant to them because they have an infinite amount of what? Of the same thing, of money. Right? So if money weren't a concept, then now they'd have nothing. Right?
You're going backwards through the system.
How so?
Well, if you're starting with a finite thing,
Yeah.
material thing, or a word, which is something that, from our perspective, exists.
Oh, yeah.
And then you go backwards through the system, through all the garments, and then into the midot.
Yeah, so yeah,
It's
so
going back- it's-
the comment is we're going backwards through the system.
Yeah.
We're tracing it back through
Yeah.
its, call it Seder Hishtalshalut, its chain of creation to its source.
Yeah.
And as you go back through the system, you see it's less and less relevant.
Right.
And first of all, it has quantitative irrelevance. But now that we're talking about the actual essence of the soul, for this conversation, that's the midot and seichel. Now it has qualitative irrelevance, right? Because to take my example, if you have someone that has infinite money, a dollar is irrelevant quantitatively, but qualitatively, it relates to what he has or she has. But now if I say, I'm talking about one word compared to my midot, my spiritual emotions, and my intellect that's before thought, now it's not just quantitatively irrelevant, it's actually a whole other thing. I mean, my soul is not a physical word, it's in another plane, right? So now it doesn't just have quantitative irrelevance, it's also qualitatively not there compared to the qualitative infiniteness of the soul compared to the physical phenomenon of one word.
What makes up my soul?
Well, that's the metaphor we have for that is the sefirot. What makes up my soul is the 10 sefirot as they flow down from God, from the Ein Sof. So the stuff we learned, the 6 emotions, and then Malchut, the expression, the 3 intellectual flows, that's from, I think, chapter 2, right? So that what makes up the soul is the 10 faculties of the soul that correspond to the 10 midot.
The faculties are equivalent to the garments of the soul?
No. The garments are external, the faculties are internal. So when I'm talking and acting and thinking, that's the soul putting on garments. But before that, the soul had an aspect of intellect and emotion, and those 3 and 7 flows, those are the essence of the soul. Yeah. So you see the analogy here? One word compared to my faculty of speech, my faculty of thought, and then finally the essence of my soul. Now that word really, I could say, it's irrelevant, it doesn't exist, it's not there. So now go back to God, and now go back to our question, does God's speech exist? And the Alter Rebbe will say, it has the same irrelevance that one word has compared to the essence of my soul. That what we're experiencing here, God's speech, which is the entire world, right? One word and boom, it's all there. The entire world is as irrelevant as one word of mine compared to all of my soul's faculties, with the caveat that it's infinitely more so irrelevant, right? The irrelevance that one word has compared to my soul's faculties that distance is the greatest distance that a human being can conceive of, basically. But that distance is like nothing compared to the distance between the irrelevance of the world and the essence of God. So this is just the best example the Alter Rebbe could find to show us how non-existent God's speech really is compared to God's essence. And in the Alter Rebbe's words. Okay.
Well, Michael, this is hard.
All right, it's hard for me too.
But the fact that
Oh, let's read it first, okay? It goes as saying, שמהן נמשכו אותיות מחשבה זו המלובשות בדיבור זה כשמדבר.
From which are derived the letters of thought that are clothed in one's speech when it is uttered. Since all of man's thoughts are either of an intellectual or an emotional nature, they derive from the soul's intellectual or emotional faculties. When one speaks, the letters of his thought descend to a lower level.
Right, so not a physical feeling or a physical thought, but my soul's capacity for feeling and my soul's capacity for thought, those are infinite compared to any single thought that I'd have, and certainly compared to a word. כי המחשבה היא גם כן בחינת אותיות כמו הדיבור, רק שהן רוחניות ודקות יותר.
For thought too, like speech, consists of letters, except that the letters of thought are more spiritual and refined. Thus, thought and speech share a common characteristic.
Right, so the term letters, otiyot, that's a kabbalistic term for any form of revelation. And if you remember when we went through the entire Sha'ar Yichud V'Emunah, we went into very great detail about the process of how the world is created by letters and how they're permuted or transformed and switched up. And there's a whole complex system of letters through which divine speech actually becomes reality. It's not so important for our discussion now, but thought and speech both come in letters. That's the Kabbalistic term for manifestation or revelation, right? I have some intellectual capacity. Now there's a flow. It's revealed as letters in my mind, and I might actually speak it in my mind as an idea, or I might just perceive it as simply a concept. But letters are involved in all those layers of communication. אבל 10 בחינות חוכמה בינה דעת חולו הן שורש ומקור המחשבה ואין בהם בחינת אותיות עדיין קודם שמתלבשות בלבוש המחשבה.
of the two attributes, chokmah, bina, dad, and so on, are the root and source of thought, and before being clothed in the garment of thought, they as yet lack the element of letters.
Right, so the same thing we're calling letters of thought, right? That voice in your mind that says, what am I going to do now? Or says, wow, this is a great opportunity. We have that voice that narrates in our mind, I think. Intellect is before that. Intellect is above that. Intellect is the pure capacity for thought. It doesn't have letters. So before it, right, so before intellect had to compress itself into letters, it was infinite compared to that capacity of thought. למשל, כשנופלת איזו אהבה וחמדה בליבו של אדם, קודם שעולה מהלב אל המוח לחשב ולהרהר בו.
For example, when a man suddenly becomes conscious of a certain love or desire in his heart, before it has risen from the heart to the brain, to meditate on it and ponder it.
Right, so we get this, right? I haven't thought about something, but suddenly I had a feeling. Before it was something that occupied my actual thought. I suddenly experienced a feeling, and that got my mind working on it, right? I walked by a field and I smelled a new flower, and I thought, wow, I have this emotion. And then I thought to myself, I wonder what kind of flower that is. I wonder if I can plant it. I wonder, and then your mind starts going. But the emotion actually triggers the thought. אין בו בחינת אותיות עדיין, רק חפץ פשוט וחשיקה בלב על הדבר ההוא הנחמד אצלו.
It has not yet acquired the element of letters. It is only a pure desire and longing for the object of his affection.
Right, so that capacity of the emotions of my soul, the midot of my soul, that is infinite compared to the physical thought that they inspire. וכל שכן קודם שנפלה התאווה והחמדה בליבו לאותו דבר רק הייתה בכוח חוכמתו ושכלו וידיעתו. All the more so, yeah.
All the more so before he began to feel in his heart a craving and desire for that thing when it was yet confined within the realm of his intellect.
Chokhmah, yeah.
Ma, understanding, corresponding to bina, and knowledge, that.
Right, so this is the order generally. First, my soul becomes intellectually aware of something. Then I experience some emotional flow of my soul about it, right? Which enters into the heart and becomes a physical emotion. Then that inspires the physical brain to start thinking about it. And after I thought about it, now the brain directs the mouth to speak about it. So those are the levels, right, that need to happen for us to actually generally talk about something, is that I've become aware of it intellectually, I've had an emotion, that emotion has caused my physical brain to do physical thinking, and that physical thinking creates physical speech.
Do doctors who study the brain's activities parallel these thinkings?
Well, it's interesting. The question was, do doctors who study the brain parallel these writings? And if I can give a plug, I hope everyone will come a week today at 7:30. My teacher, Label Wolf from Australia, will be giving a talk on meditation here at Temple. And for us in this class at 6 o'clock, we'll meet him earlier to give a more in-depth talk about this system of meditation, because very nice that we've been learning it. We can have a higher level conversation with him. I hope you'll come for both. But he also,
We're gonna meet at 10 o'clock then in the morning?
the next day.
That's a Wednesday, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I said a week today. Thank you. Correction. It's Wednesday. A week yesterday. And then we'll still have a class the next morning. But Label Wolf is a psychologist and very much into the study of the mind, the study of psychology and neuroplasticity, and looking at new imaging of the brain and seeing how things are really working there compared to what we thought was going on. And it's very exciting that this knowledge, which is so ancient, is very much being validated by the most recent advances in psychology and brain imaging.
It is validated.
Yeah. For instance, Maimonides said, centuries ago, a person should never get angry no matter what. It's just a dress rehearsal for the next outburst. There's no reason ever to be angry, even if it's deserved. And for 3 generations, psychologists have taught, well, you got to vent, you got to let it out, it's going to pop, it's going to burst, it's going to give you high blood pressure. It's important to vent anger. And Maimonides was sitting there in our text saying, sorry, I'm a doctor and I'm a sage, and Judaism says no. And, along comes brain imaging, and we see now that any time we actually allow a process to happen in our mind, it just makes that process more likely to occur. So the only thing that's happening when I'm venting is I'm becoming a more angry person. And the idea that venting is semi-healthy has been completely refuted by modern psychology. And I'm just describing it as a layperson because I learn with Label, but when he's here, feel free, I know he'll take questions, feel free to ask him about the scientific side of how this text is bearing out. And by the way, that class which we touched on last week, or the week before, that's being taught in 400 locations around the world based on the Tanya, that's actually continuing education for whether it's doctors or psychologists. I don't know the details of it, but it actually was presented to the associated psychologists, whoever it was, and they accepted it as continuing education. They said, wow, this Tanya is exactly what's on the cutting edge of psychology and science right now. So 100%, right? Even though I think you and I grew up learning other things and with other realities of what the mind was, the most modern advances of mind science are really coming to line with what we're learning here. Was that a short answer? Was that? All the more so, where are we? Meaning? שהיה נודע אצלו אותו דבר שהוא נחמד ונעים טוב וטוב ויפה להשיגו ולדבק בו כגון ללמוד איזו חוכמה או לאכול איזו מאכל ערב.
Meaning that the thing was known to him to be desirable and gratifying, something good and pleasant to attain and to cling to, as, for instance, to study a certain discipline or to eat some delicacy. Then, in the state of intellectual appreciation of the desirable object, before the appreciation has even developed into an emotion, there are certainly no letters present in one's mind.
Right, so I've never heard of piano. Maybe I never heard of music. I come from some place where there's no music, who knows? I grew up on a deserted island. And suddenly I walk by and I hear someone playing the most beautiful piece on the piano. Now I'm suddenly aware of it. So before that, did I have any emotions about learning piano? I couldn't. But once I'm aware of it, now the emotions can start to flow, and now I may start to think about it, and finally I'll call someone to say, hey, I want some piano lessons, right? And I'll start to do it. But the first thing that has to happen is I have to be intellectually aware. That's the trigger for any flow of our midot and for what causes the brain to actually think. רק לאחר שכבר נפלה החמדה והתאווה בליבו בכוח חוכמתו ושכלו וידתו.
Only after the desire and craving have already descended into its heart, example, after they have developed into emotions through the stimulus of his wisdom, understanding, and knowledge.
ואחר כך חזרה ועלתה מהלב למוח לחשב ולהרהר בו איך להוציא תאוותו מכוח אל הפועל, להשיג המאכל או למידת החכמה בפועל.
And only after they have ascended once again from the heart back to the brain to think and meditate on how to implement his desire by actually obtaining that food or actually studying that subject.
Right, so like you said, he's taking us back through the whole process of consciousness that results in that one word that is the object of our example. Does that word exist compared to my faculty of intellect, which could conceive of any intellectual concept or phenomenon, and that's condensed into now an emotional flow, or that inspires an emotional flow, which now creates letters of thought, which are much more physical compared to the intellect, which actually creates physical speech, which now is like, it's a whole other world of non-existence compared to that first capacity for any intellectual appreciation that I have in my soul. הרי בך נולדו בחינות אותיות במוחו, שהן אותיות בלשון עם ועם, המדברים והמהרהרים בהם כל ענייני העולם.
It is only at this point, when one applies his thoughts to implementing his desire, that letters are born in one's mind, corresponding to the language of each of the nations, who employ these letters when speaking and thinking about everything in the world.
That's just a side point that there are languages other than Hebrew, right? Many of us think in English and every other language in the world, and so that's, in terms of how inconsequential one word is, that's one word of how many languages there are that I could have possibly said them in even, right? They're all there. And from all this, let's go ahead to the bottom, from all this we may.
Oh. Okay. From all this, we may understand the rabbi's earlier statement that a spoken word is utterly without value in comparison with the soul's intellectual and emotional powers, which are described here for our purpose as the essence of the soul. As the essence of the soul. Surely then the divine word by which God creates and animates all the worlds has no value at all next to God, who is truly and absolutely infinite. Thus all the words created and sustained by the divine word are as if non-existent from God's perspective, and their perspective does not affect any change in unity. This theme will further be discussed.
All right, so this is going to be our solution for how God is still alone, unchanged, after the world has been created through divine speech. Because that presented a problem. If I'm really going to say there's only God, and I need that concept clear in my mind to get this long, short path to be effective, I'm going to say there's only God here. There's nothing else. There's no other phenomenon. There's been no change in God. Okay, the world, I get that shouldn't exist, but divine speech, that doesn't exist. So this is a concept and a example we want to meditate on somewhat, to have clear in my mind, to the degree that one word that I could say is irrelevant to my faculty of speech, and then my faculty of thought, and then my emotional flow of my soul, and then my intellect of my soul. The degree that one word is nothing compared to that, that's just, almost an irrelevant example of how non-existent all of God's speech is compared to God's essence. And it's God's speech that's actually projecting the world here, which doesn't even have its own existence. Its existence is just God's speech. That's all it is, right? So the world doesn't exist. It's really just God's speech, but also God's speech doesn't exist compared to God's essence, which is what we're focusing on. So that's a tricky one. I see a lot of us have some crossed eyes, but we still want to use our first technique, our short-long path, which is easier to explain, but really takes time to apply. So let's get back to our practice of finishing with a bit of meditation. We got 7 or 8 minutes. And I'll show you that, and as Leva will describe, perhaps, there's different types of meditation in Jewish practice. One type is meditation while you're learning. So we don't just want to learn something intellectually, we now want to focus on it and let the details of that concept fill our mind intellectually. And that's one type of meditation that we can do. A second type is meditation after learning, where you really focus on the concept for a more extended amount of time, and it has a certain amount of light that comes out of it, so to speak.
How much time should we spend on each of these?
It's up to you. It's personal. And the Friedecker Rebbe, the last Rebbe's teacher, said in a text, as I recall, I think it was him. It depends on the individual. Some individuals, like great lofty souls, will 30 seconds focusing on the Ein Sof, and boom, they're just in Dveikus and they're up in higher worlds. Most normal people, it might be take 20 minutes a day or an hour a day of sitting and meditating, and you have to eventually dislodge your mind and your brain from its physical orientation and get it to appreciate the more subtler spiritual senses that we have. So it depends on the person. And then the third type, the first type is meditation while learning, the second is after learning, and the third is while praying, and there you really let the godliness, so to speak, of the concept shine forth. So not just the intellectual, spiritual light of it, but the actual godliness of the concept, if it's a concept about godliness. So if you find yourself in a comfortable position, and if you've been furrowing your brows trying to understand this crazy chapter, you can just smooth them out. Let your eyelids be smooth and relaxed. And let your shoulders drop a little bit more, your spine lengthen. Let's scan our physical body for any spots where we are not at ease. Just let those soften. Quickly scan our senses and take notice of what's coming in. My vision, anything I'm seeing behind my closed eyelids. My hearing, information entering my consciousness through that portal, as well as sense of touch, feeling my hands perhaps on my clothing, my feet on the floor, or the air against my body. Sense of taste, any residual taste, and even my sense of smell, which is said to be the most spiritual of the senses. What's moving in to my consciousness through all those 5 senses. Let's bring our breathing to a relaxed, slow pattern, count of 4 in. And the in-breath stays in for a count of 4. Nice relaxed out for 4. Let that hold for 4. Come with me. In, 2, 3, 4. And stay there. 2, 3, 4. Breathing out. 2, 3, 4. Let's remain there. Just follow around that cycle a few times. Let's open up our wisdom gateway. We should be familiar with this. The space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath, that count of 4, as it were, that'll be our wisdom gateway. And in the next few breaths, just allow that to open up. And just like we used other concepts, now we'll use the concept we looked at today, and we'll do perhaps meditation after learning, we'll call this. So we understand one word compared to my faculty of intellect. It's a really irrelevant thing. And just picture the entire world, the entire cosmos, flowing out of one word of divine speech. Try and hold that idea, that concept in your mind. All of creation is really just one word of divine speech. And now place in your wisdom gateway the challenge of looking at how non-existent, how irrelevant that one word of all of creation is compared to the divine being, which is the midot of the Ein Sof, and the intellect of the Ein Sof, and even above that, the essence of the Ein Sof. As much as my physical senses may paint another picture, my intellect can fill itself with the meditation that even that word of divine speech is nothing compared to the essence of the divine light. And certainly all of creation, nothing more than God's essence itself. If you're meditating at home, feel free to pause the video here for any amount of time you'd like. When you're back with us, let's now allow that meditation, that concept that has filled my mind, to flow out to the rest of my day, and recognize whatever I encounter, it all has that same quality of I'm basically looking directly at God, at a world that doesn't exist, and everything's being created directly from that word of divine speech that itself doesn't even exist. And the more I can project that, the more I will benefit from the amazing tools we'll be receiving in the next several chapters. When you're ready, you can wiggle your toes and your fingers and open your eyes. You ever listen to a song and you're like just somewhere else during the song, and it's over, and then you come back? Isn't meditation a little like that? It's just sort of, you sort of...
Driven all the way downtown like that.
There you go.
All of a sudden find myself there.
So I'm around if anyone has questions. We'll see you on Wednesday at 6 o'clock for if you're taking this class or on the videos. It'll be an amazing conversation with Label at a higher level, and then 7:30 with the whole community having a general talk about meditation. I think it'll be here, yeah.
Will you be
So,
videoing?
my problem is, what about?
Yes, it should be videotaped, yeah. We got that, yeah.